I see the conversations, where folks are like at least willing to entertain a conversation about using AI, but maybe they're reticent, maybe they don't understand, maybe they've had a bad experience, whatever it might be. Fair enough. And everyone gets really caught up on, oh, it's going to hallucinate. Oh, it's going to do this. No one has the conversation of like, so what did you put in? Like, what was your prompt? What was the input? Not the hallucination concerns or other things aren't issues or shouldn't be evaluated, but realistically, like crap in, crap out. That's how life works. Yeah, I find it very interesting that people don't have that conversation.
Welcome back to another power-packed episode of TMF Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Palmer, and today we're going to be diving into AI and how it's helping author regulatory documents throughout the entire life cycle of clinical trials. We're talking about a future where documents aren't just created by humans anymore. AI is stepping in to streamline, speed up, and even improve accuracy of regulatory submissions. But the big question is, how do we regulate AI itself? How do we make sure it's reliable as we need it to be? So in this episode, I've invited Edye Edens, and we're not holding back. We're going deep into the regulations, the challenges, and the massive opportunities that come with this technology. If you're in clinical research, regulatory, or just looking to stay ahead of the curve, this is one conversation you don't want to miss. So let's get after it. Edye, welcome to the TMF Daily Podcast.
Hey there. It's always my pleasure to be on here. Thank you so much for having me. This is such a big topic, right? And so much to unpack here.
It is. I'm super excited. So let's just start with the big picture. AI, it's transforming so many industries right now. But How is it impacting the way we author regulatory documents? What are you kind of seeing in the field?
Right. Absolutely. At first, at even a higher level, I think it's worth noting, I think we have a little bit of AI fatigue right now, right? As much as we're all really excited. And I think we've made some great strides in getting to the idea that, get on board or get left behind. We are going to have to, reg nerd or not, right? We are going to have to get on board. As I was telling Nikki, I was looking for just the right shirt to wear this morning to look professional. And I saw this hanging in my closet and thought, I think this is actually the right shirt for the day.
Fabulous.
Right? So anyway, I say all that to say, with great power comes great responsibility, right? Age old saying. With the fact that we have some incredible technology in front of us, some incredible capacity, the future is in our fingertips and it's moving really fast. We also have some fatigue. We are also, I know the recent trade shows I've been at and I've seen it posted by others on LinkedIn and, look, everywhere I turn, it's AI this, AI this, AI this. And it's also like any other new technology. Some of it works and some of it doesn't. Some of it is being overpromised and underdelivered while others are not, right? So you need to be mindful of that whole EQ about the concept and the topic before you even look in one particular industry to then go, okay, how do I really narrowly apply it? And I also think the applications within healthcare and clinical trials, well, I don't think I know. I'm going to say a remedial statement here, but then I'll unpack it a little is so varied. When you're talking about using AI, I was just having this conversation with a colleague this week. When you're talking about using AI for making a medical diagnosis, a clinical decision in the moment with a patient. I'm all in for technology, but I want to know my doctor's making that final call. I'm not ready to pull that. And so when we think about how we need to protect, but promote and regulate that use of the technology compared to a regulatory document like a CSR or, an application to any of the many regulatory agencies that we work with, it's not that those applications are any less important. My gosh, we're attesting to the safety profile of a drug before we put it in a human for the first time. It's incredibly important. But there's another check valve. You have FDA reviewers, you have IRB members, you have, whatever members boards, et cetera. And, if you're in oncology, you have 87 more than that. Right. But we have them for a reason because we don't always trust the system and we don't always trust even each other, right? Because we get so aggressive and so into what we want to do and create for the patient, which is powerful.
And even doctors we get second opinions sometimes.
Right, exactly. And so I think this notion, like I think where if we can find a really harmonious place between AI fatigue, the over promise, under deliver, the fear, which is very legitimate, and the, oh my gosh, it's a panacea and can cure everything. The sweet spot in there is, we still need humans. Last I checked, we're not getting replaced, at least, not this decade. And we need to use the technology for what it is mature enough to be used for today and tomorrow, while continuing to make it better, right, for tomorrow and the next day. And I understand the idea of failing forward and iterating technology to get it there, but there are some things it's not prepared to do. That's where I actually think you have more potential implications and applications in clinical trials and clinical research initially than you do in clinical care. And I'm sure some people would totally redirect me and rearrange my furniture. And I totally welcome all the comments on that. Please educate me. But I just think what we are capable of doing, because we have so many extra check valves and so many extra steps in clinical trials and research, means that we can begin implementing it in some places where it could really benefit while limiting any possibility of harm. Because like for what you and I do, if it's working in a regulatory document space, whether it's generating the content, whether it's refining the content, whether it's holding it, like a repository, whatever space you're in the entire life cycle, the reality is worst case scenario, your content is subpar, right? You misstated the toxicology, the PK, the PD in something. You over or understated an adverse event. You didn't give enough detail. You put the wrong information in the wrong location for that particular application. Because we're very specific about format, because let's face it, our regulatory bodies have thousands of applications and like 5 people to do it, so it could be any of those things, but you're not going to immediately act upon it. And at least in theory, if we're all doing our jobs vehemently, it will get caught. You know what I mean? And so there's just a different profile of risk there. And I also think from the novice armchair AI expert I'm trying to become, we'll say, I don't in any way want to put myself in the room with some of the intelligent folks in this field. But from what they've educated me and taught me and what I have been able to learn, the use of AI right now to synthesize large amounts of information in ways that then we are, creating, organizing, synthesizing, and formatting that into a different, setup to get information across to the next party to pass the baton. That's actually what AI does well now, right?
It's a tool.
So like, let's do it. Let's do it with what it's doing well, and let's not. The other part of the reg piece, and I wonder what you think about this. This sounds like a really cheeky cop out, but I said this to someone else for the first time this week, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you said it out loud." And I was like, "Okay, I'm not alone." And that is, we're before AI reg, like we're before using AI in regulatory document, preparation and management, but we are doing that before we really have any regulation around it.
Right.
And so I wonder what that's even going to look like. Like, it won't go completely unregulated. We obviously care about any type of technology being validated in a very specific way.
$1 million word right there.
Yep. Standardization, validation. Let's throw in some part 11. Like, let's just go all the way, right? But I say that to say, and I had this conversation with a very AI forward tech individual who also happens to be a biomedical professional. And I said, I just wonder, when we were first moving to electronic medical records, when we were moving into CTMS, we didn't think about part 11. It was like, what does it matter as long as it's in the system and it's accurate? Like, right. This is no different than Alcoa, which we were always doing, by hand, right? Mm-hmm. But then with that technology and time, we saw every system wasn't equal, and we weren't getting quality data for across the board out of these systems. And we did have to have a validation protocol. And so we're looking at all these different possibilities for authoring reg docs, for, editing, maintaining, et cetera. And none of them are across a standardized validation platform. Nope. That's not to say they're not secure or right. using all the best principles and guidance, but it's not a standardized quote unquote validation protocol. And it was a really interesting conversation. This was probably about 6 months ago. I had a conversation with someone who used to work at the FDA who was like, well, so how do you validate these? Like, that's the biggest concern with all these different providers that are hitting the market. What do you validate? And I was like, right, but to what standard? There is no validation standard. I mean, I'm not suggesting I love the idea of the wild, wild west, but at the same time, there isn't a rule. If you come to me as an attorney and say, Edye, I want your legal opinion on whether or not I have to comply with XYZ regulation, I don't have a regulation to give you right now that says this is the regulation for when you're generating regulatory documents or working with them and AI. And we don't have it in GCP. We don't have it in, I mean, we are all completely cart before horse right now.
New territory.
Right. So like, you want to talk about it. You want to talk about what you're worried about. But then on the other hand, and to be fair, I didn't have an answer. This tech, AI biomedical professional I was talking to about 6 months ago, right after I talked to the FDA person about, validation, goes, why would you care? Why would a regulatory body care whether a human wrote this, with a pen and paper, whether they used Word, whether they used a platform, whether they used AI, whether they stored it in a repository, as long as the information in the document is, accurate. Why would we even go down this rabbit hole? And I was like, oh, you know what? I don't have a good answer to that. I don't. I know what the answer to that is, but I can't say I always agree with it. And so that's where I'm sort of waiting. I'm loving this sweet spot because who needs more part 11 in their life? But at the same time, I know it's borrowed time. There's no way, but I can't think of if I'm going to, predict the tea leaves, what would they regulate? Would it be the validation of any system where you're storing your regulatory documents or your applications? Would they draw the line at if you're just storing it there, that's okay. But if the AI actually authors or refines, you know what I mean, generates content, that's where we draw the line of it has to be validated. And also, and this is a conversation way past us, but I'd be very curious to pitch it to some really smart folks. What is it you would validate? Because everyone's going to be using different models.
Right.
There's way more than just Chat GPT out there. And so everyone's using different models. They're going to use them different ways. They're going to train them different ways. So, I mean, I think the standardization would actually be really hard.
Me too.
To come up with, really hard.
But like you said, it's weighing the advantages and the disadvantages with the AI.
Yeah, 100%.
Mm-hmm. And with those,
where do you? Oh, go ahead. I was going to say. No, I was going to say, I'm super curious. In TMF, really granular. What are you seeing in the AI applications? What are you, liking, seeing? Kind of I'm not sure about that maybe I haven't, since I don't spend as much time quite at that level as you do.
I mean, I think you are seeing it. I think a lot of people are just scared. I'm going to lose my job. AI is going to take over. And you and I both know, that's not true. AI is the tool. It's your assistant. You're still sort of micromanaging the AI.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're making sure AI is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. Did it get filed in the right location? Did it look through all the metadata and make sure that it's accurate? Is it speeding up the process a little bit? Yeah, sure. Is it good when it's working? Yep. Is it bad? Sometimes.
Yep. Sometimes, just every other technology we have, it's only good when it works.
Yeah. And I can say the same thing when I edit video podcasts. AI is really good at coming up sometimes with the micro clips, but sometimes it's really bad and it misses it. But if you don't feed it the right information and tell it exactly what you want, then it's just going to give you garbage.
But I think that's a really good point about AI at large that folks don't understand. I see the conversations, where folks are at least willing to entertain a conversation about using AI, but maybe they're reticent, maybe they don't understand, maybe they've had a bad experience, whatever it might be. Fair enough. And everyone gets really caught up on oh, it's going to hallucinate. Oh, it's going to do this. Oh, it's going to do this. No one has the conversation of so what did you put in?
Right.
What was your prompt?
What did you feed it?
What was the input? Not that the hallucination concerns or other, things aren't issues or shouldn't be evaluated, but realistically, right? Crap in, crap out. That's how life works. And so, yeah, I find it very interesting that people don't have that conversation. I mean, even when I hear people at companies go, oh, we evaluated this tool, we evaluated that tool, we didn't like it, it didn't work for us. And I always want to know more. I'm okay, well, why? Why?
Why?
Tell me what's up. And And I don't want to invalidate their experience because I wasn't there, but they'll tell me stuff that to me is like, okay, so you didn't give it the right information. And so I don't know that you really know if that's a good tool or not. I don't think. Now, there's some other pieces and layers to that, in my opinion, right? Like, why weren't you trained? Why weren't you resourced in a way to give it the correct input? If you're going to go all in on purchasing some AI solution or adding it to your workflow, you might as well get everything out of it you can. Why not? And that's always frustrating to hear because it's like, well, did you try it this way? Did you try it that way? What about this way? And then you're like, oh, okay, I see what happened here. But that doesn't mean that even if they used it perfectly and put, the most beautiful input possible in, that they would have gotten what it needed. It really may have had, glitches and issues. So I think that's part of it. I also think it's very interesting, the saturation in certain spots in the life cycle. Like, I would be very curious in our collective professional group, right? When you think of like Darshan Kulkarni of the Kulkarni Law Firm, I think also of John, right?
Yep. Angie Schwab.
Angie Schwab. I'm just thinking through the different folks, Jennifer Bonfrisco, Tay Romero, who have like different areas, right? Like patient recruitment or QA and are you guys all seeing the saturation I see where, like, for me, people think reg submissions, right? Because I did a lot of consulting around that and there's a lot of hype around that, and AI makes sense. But there's very specific points in time that only have like one or two vendors. And then there's others that I see like 50. And I'm like, who did the market research there? Like, and I get it. Everyone, I'm sure, could tell me why they're different than the next person and what differentiates them. And I totally get it. And, you have to hit the market and take your chance and take your shot. But I'm curious in those other places, like when you're in the more completely legal transactional side, the TMF side, the QA, what are you guys seeing? And is it the same where you see like huge bottlenecks in certain spaces and then just crickets in others where you're like, really? No one wanted to do that with this? Like, really? Okay. Are you seeing that too?
Yeah. And it's like even interesting, like the FDA and the EMA, like what's their stance on this?
Right. From what I've gathered, and it's not like, they've come out with anything that is legally binding or official, but we all chase anyone from the FDA or EMA when we're at a conference, right? Let's be real, like stalking them in the bathroom, you know what I mean? Like, oh, hi. I had no idea you were from the FDA, even though it says it all over your name tag. I can't imagine what it's like when they travel. They must want to like completely wear a mask or something. Right. Like, all these people are trying to get me to say stuff, and you all know I can't say anything, and I do not represent the whole agency. Anyway, but I say that I have yet to have any interaction or hear of any interaction or, podcast with any interaction where it's just strong arm no.
Right.
To me, it has been the same approach that we have seen with every other change in how we approach clinical trials or clinical research. I look at it and think, I know this is, a really polarizing topic, but the guidance that just dropped on DCTs and elements of DCTs, right? That's not something 5 years ago you or I would have said was going to be an FDA guidance document.
Right.
No way.
Wasn't even on the radar.
Wasn't even on the radar, right? But we did it. We did it before we had regulations. We learned. We posited regulations. We learned some more. And now we have guidance. Regulatory is always reactive. It has to be. It can't move as fast as the tech or the latest innovation. But there's like a power in that, right? Like to me, that's a positive in that your regulatory bodies have a chance to really see the latest innovation and how it's being used in all its glory, also in all its failure, and then begin to have the conversation of, I think this is how we should put bumpers on it. And I think that's what we'll see here. But I haven't gotten any indication from, any tea leaf, right, that they're just like, no, or right. This is bad, or we don't want to embrace this. We're
all just waiting very patiently.
Well, it's like, look, this is new. We have to see what it's even capable of. The other thing that people don't understand, and I say this two ways, your startups, your small and mighty entrepreneurs, your biotechs out there who are blazing a trail, love you, love your energy, but you don't get it any more than your huge pharmaceutical sponsors, huge CROs, huge antiquated, health centers. And what I mean by that is you have one bucket of those individuals who they don't want to be first. They don't, right. They want everybody else to try it, right?
We wrote about this.
Right. Because they want to, if someone's going to get in trouble, they want to see how they got in trouble first. Okay. fair enough. That's one. And the other is, I'm going to be first, I'm going to fail forward kind of energy. Well, the thing is, the FDA really isn't endorsing either of those. If you think about it, the FDA is never going to say, just kick down the door and go on in without a risk analysis on something. So the idea of, build the tech and then see how they regulate it is really, it's not ideal. It's not. That's not what they're asking you to do. Having said that, your regulatory bodies also know if they wait for the industry giants, for those older, larger organizations, we'll be waiting a very long time. It'll be 2050 and we'll still be doing research on paper. Okay. And so the FDA or, the EMA or the regulatory bodies are really the ones who live in the middle. They're really the ones who are like, I appreciate your hustle, startup. I appreciate that you are going to build it and then, break all the barriers and then we'll have to try to contain you. That's what innovation's all about. We need you. Also, we need you, slower moving large entities, because you balance that pace. You slow down the innovation enough that the regulatory bodies get a chance to get in the middle there and go like, okay, all right, I'm glad you're bringing this to the forefront, but we have some concerns, or, we need to have some ways that we need to regulate this.
Right. It's a checks and balance.
Exactly. But I get the impression regulators are very keen. I mean, we have digital health, software as a medical device and a technology now. We've embraced that. We're learning. Yep. Telehealth has been fully embraced. You've got some great companies out there working on that. And I think if you look at, not to derail from AI, but if you look at that recent FDA guidance on those elements around decentralized trials, I mean, they came right out and gave you a gift. They took away the task log. They empowered the HCP. They're giving you an opportunity to even pay them. I mean, they're saying we need to do this differently and approach it differently. And so I think if you see a regulatory body going about endorsing one, open door and one avenue, that often can tell you the sort of temperature of the room, right, for the whole organization. And like I said, I also think, you're looking at, and I've had conversations with some of the regulatory professionals inside some of the agencies, right, where they're the ones reviewing the mass influx of submissions. And they're going, if you could give me a technology that would help it be faster, easier, better, we could check certain things before it ever gets to my desk. It could summarize,
mundane tasks.
Right. And it's like, look, I'm not suggesting I can just not review this application and click, go. But they want something just as much as the people writing the applications want something. And that's yet another area, right? But I have yet to see that many players in that space at all for something to review with. Yep. Although I know it's coming, matter of time.
Yep.
And I'm curious there, how will the regulatory agencies standardize and have compliance around what's submitted to them and what's used to generate and submit?
Right. Yeah.
Because you got to think that
platforms,
whatever the application was or platform that was going to submit right in, to that regulatory agency or, apply or integrate in. I mean, that's your ESG, that's your gateway. You're going to want some serious validation around anything that's touching that. So I'd be really curious to follow that part of the market too.
Me too.
Not just us, but the regulators have struggles too. They're humans trying to do way too much work with way too few resources, just like the rest of us. But again, you have, I'm sure, startups or entrepreneurs out there who are like, oh, I have a product, Edye, I'm working on it. And then you have, the actual regulatory agency as a whole that will be slow to adopt. And rightfully so. And then even if you have your regulatory agency adopt, then they have to get everyone who's applying to them to adopt. Mm-hmm. Right? And push that.
Too.
Oh,
how do we get everyone on board? Especially the people, I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm not jumping on the ship. This is how we do it.
What if it's a barrier to access? What if it's look, this is an electronic system that, or the qualifications or the validation protocol to be able to use any of the, electronic vended systems are of a candor or a nature that makes it cost prohibitive. And so now it's a barrier to entry. Now it's, hey, I have an incredible test article I'd love to bring to market, but I can't because I don't have the money to literally get the submission in. Or you might have if you had one jurisdiction that accepted this and one that didn't, then that's going to impact your global ability, because people are going to go, oh, well, I'm going to go to the 5 jurisdictions I don't have to do this, and the one that I do, sorry, like I'll skip, right? Unless you're a huge global pharmaceutical sponsor, right?
Mm-hmm. Money's always the issue. And a lot of people, they don't have the time to do the validation. Or there's just people who hate doing UAT flat out. They're like,
which is fair. I don't like it. It's not fun.
It's easier just to keep doing what you're doing than to try something new sometimes. They're like, is it really going to save me time in the long run? That's the big question.
And I think the other piece that I think we're moving away from that notion of everybody's afraid of AI. And now the next step is, okay, I realize AI could probably help me out, whatever it is I do. I need to go out and look at the tools and evaluate and see what might help me and what's available. But then there's this recognition of, I'm going to have to learn a new tool.
That's the bigger piece, the education piece.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's time, and that's money, and that's fair. And the other part of that too, to me, is like, it's new, but it's not new. I said this to someone this summer where I said, well, we all had to learn what a CTMS was, didn't we? Mm-hmm. Wasn't fun. I mean, I remember when onboarding to, the original biggest, largest CTMS that we all used at some point. I mean, it was like a 10-month process at our organization. We hired 5 extra FTEs just to do it. So like the notion, or like, when you hear someone switching EMRs, I mean, it is huge. It's massive, but it's done all the
investment.
Time. Right. It's done all the time. Like, this isn't, we don't like it, but it's done all the time. And the reality is, if you really want something, you'll do it. The other part of it too is, if you're doing it with the right providers, you should have some assistance in that validation.
That's just it right there.
Yep.
Who's going to help me? Who's going to hold my hand while I do this?
Yep. Aren't you always blown away? Like, I don't know about you, but as a consultant or contractor attorney, I am consistently blown away by when I start working with a client and I'm getting, the specs on, okay, so what do you use and how do you use it and what's your workflow and what are we concerned about? And start doing that gap analysis. And they go, oh, well, I use product X. And you're like, okay, last I checked, I don't think that's Part 11 compliant. How did you validate? Oh, no, out of the box, it's compliant. Said so on back of the box. They told me when I bought it. And I'm like,
the due diligence.
See, the thing is, validation is an activity. Like, it's an active step. It's an activity. It's not a checked box. So there's no way anything off of a shelf could be validated the moment you pulled it out of the box. That's literally contrary to the definition of what validation is.
Right.
And they don't know, man. They got sold.
Validated it, so I don't need to. And it's like, well, you purchased bits and pieces of that product. It still needs to be validated. Like,
and it has to be validated at your location. It has to be validated with your workflow. It has to be validated with your data, and people get really confused about that. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't want to have to do all this extra million-step validation either. There's people who do nothing but Part 11 for their whole career. It's like billing compliance.
So maybe we'll see an increase in people like doing UAT. Like,
well,
maybe
that's what I'm wondering.
We're going
right, but and wouldn't that be? I mean, think about it. If you are an AMC, if you are a large pharma, if you're a CRO, even midsize. I mean, you're working on CTMS, you've got to be tied into EMRs somewhere. Now you've got several applications coming into CTMS, to help with recruitment and medrec retrieval and, seamless EMR contact. I mean, eventually you need a whole department just to start going through procurement of all of your different vendors in terms of validation, right? I mean, that's what I'm thinking, is like, you're starting to go through and have all these technologies, whatever AI vendors you choose to use, whatever you invest in, it's going to end up going through that process somehow. Yeah. And it already is. I mean, it's not like companies aren't already doing, a security analysis when they onboard a vendor. I wonder. And I also wonder, I will be very curious too, to see where this falls in the priorities for regulatory agencies. I mean, it's something that will happen eventually. I can't imagine we'll get 20 years down the road and not have some validation guidance or protocol, just like Part 11 happened. But it's not going to be tomorrow. It's not even going to be in the next 2 years. I mean, I just can't imagine that is the highest priority right now when it's just around, again, the regulatory documents that are being submitted and then still reviewed and checked.
And this is kind of the irony of the industry because we move so fast every day. Like the days are so fast. You sit in your seat for 12 hours and you're like, wow, how is it already 7 o'clock at night? But yet we move so slow with the regulations and the guidance.
Isn't it the most amazing dichotomy? Like sometimes I thrive on that. And then other days I'm like, what am I doing? I am in the wrong place. Like these people are insane. I remember, you know how I used to always say it when I was in-house at a big AMC. So let me get that straight. Because I was in a comprehensive cancer center in one of my roles there. And so, I mean, I could see any protocol we were working on, including phase 1. And some of the stuff we were doing was unbelievable. I mean, like I could read the protocol 4 times and I'm still not sure I fully understood how cool it was. And this was like right when CAR-T was starting and we were one of the first places to do it. I mean, it was just such a cool time. And we were also doing research on paper in like the most redundant, inefficient way possible. And it wasn't because anybody wanted to. It was just, that's the way we'd always done it, or we were working with the resources we were provided, or, whatever it might be. But it was a constant struggle between the fact that we're doing some of the most innovative oncology work in the world, and then we're doing it in the most inefficient way possible. And everyone knew it. I mean, this is not something I'm not airing out who I used to work for. Everyone struggles with this. This is a uniform issue. You even hear it in your big sponsors where it's like, I know that we're working on, test articles that could cure this or stop this or prevent this. But I also know I'm working on, 2015 Dell laptop that doesn't work half the time and my internet goes in and out. And you're like, what? Like, right. Like the disconnect there is quite the wide gap. But no, the other part of it, I think that's really interesting that folks realized, I realized, I don't know how everybody else feels about it, during 2020 and COVID is like to the general public, understandably, they were getting a new report every 2 weeks, wear a mask, don't wear a mask, take this, don't take this, right? And so they're like, these people are crazy. Why have we ever trusted them with our healthcare? Like they don't know what they're doing. They're changing their advice every 10 seconds. I totally understand that perspective. I do. But for those of us in research, this was the scientific method playing out as we have always known it always does. In phase 1A, you have one hypothesis that changes by phase 1B, which changes by phase 2, and also might fall out before you get to phase 3. So the idea that you do have to try things, even in this very precarious area, to know if they work, and that is how we move that innovation forward, is a critical piece. But it's really scary once it, kind of comes to light that, this is the scientific method. What you learned in 6th grade, about testing your hypothesis, that's still how we're doing it. And so that's the other part is what could AI impact from there? Obviously you and I are thinking, and rightfully so with what we do, reg, TMF, documents, management, timelines, deadlines, standardization, getting them better. But what else? Right? I want to go in and talk about companies that are predicting how a clinical trial will go so we can move faster. Right? And have less side effects for potential patients. Or maybe even at the preclinical level, they're able to look at the test article or the device and predict if it will work as hypothesized to eliminate, waste and time and money in the industry. To me, and I know everybody looks at us and goes we'll talk about reg, but I'm like, we're boring. We're just going to generate some documents with some AI, no big deal. Although it's a huge deal. It's absolutely huge.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, regulatory inspections, they're such a big deal. Do you think using AI is going to make inspections go smoother and more transparent?
Not right now. Unfortunately, no. Unfortunately, I think this is where, much love to all my sites out there. Call me when you need a shoulder to cry on. I promise I will be here.
Ditto.
Right, please. This is the same as, and I'm very close with the Save Our Sites folks and was at their conference doing. Them. Oh my gosh, they're the best. And This was my point when I got on the stage and supported paper in the big paper versus electronic mock session we had. Everyone knows I'm all for tech. I always have been, very forward thinking. But when sites do go paperless, auditors lose their mind. And everyone interprets Part 11 wrong, if at all.
Yep.
And it creates massive headaches at the site level. It's not just the expense of finding a system and finding a way. It's the fact that legit, you have auditors who still show up and say things to your face like, I just like the feel of paper. Okay, well, that's actually not in a regulation anywhere. And that's not
feelings out.
Right, like that's not in my SOPs, which you approved. You knew I was a paperless site when you brought me in. Like, why am I having this audit fight with you? Like, if you found an adverse event, if I enrolled an ineligible patient, if I did a wrong dose mod, you better absolutely chew my ass for that. That is concerning. But I did what I was supposed to do, and you just don't like it. And unfortunately, I think we're going to have some of that happen with some of these AI tools, where you're going to be in a tougher spot than the paper versus electronic because you don't have any regs yet. You don't have formal endorsement. So the auditor can go, well, the FDA hasn't said that I can't ask you about this.
It's a personal opinion.
Right. It's a personal opinion, or it's the opinion of the auditing company, or it's the opinion of the sponsor, or the way this particular CRO or sponsor is choosing to look at or evaluate these tools. This tool doesn't meet the mark. And so I think you're going to dive into a serious can of worms here. It is going to become incredibly critical for whatever your tools are in this space that you're using to be well outlined and called out in your SOPs. And I'm not suggesting you have to use brand names or like create a situation where you have to update an SOP every time you change, one little vendor, one little license.
Or multiple complicated SOPs.
Right. Well, yeah.
You're so nervous.
Right. Like I would almost put it all in one SOP. And that's the only one that has the information that says like these, in addition to vendor management, which is just broadly applicable no matter what you have a vendor in, right? This is specifically where we're going into, that extra step of security or that extra step of self-regulation around these unique new tools. But you're going to have something, and you need to have it up front. It needs to be in that SOP pack when they approve your site. It needs to be referenced in your contract. I mean, I hate to go really, really lawyer for a second. Well, I don't hate to.
I love it.
I am. I'm a lawyer. Let's get real. But I say that because this is what happened when we started moving into electronic signatures. And this is what happened when we started moving into electronic records. And I get it. I don't envy the auditor. I would encourage sites to not come at it like in an adversarial way. I mean, I think you come out and go, yeah, we don't have regulations either. We're flying blind just like you. And so that's why we documented in this SOP how we vet, how we evaluate, how we utilize. Also, that's why we put it in the SOPs up front with you. That's why we put it in the contract. Not because we're trying to be the jerk lawyers, rather because we're trying to be transparent. We don't have any more information than you do. But I also think when you're evaluating, and I know this is easy to say, much harder to do, when you're the trial site evaluating, if you want to work with a sponsor, if you want to take certain trials, you need to, even if it's someone you worked with before, I'd start rereading the language. I'd start digging in and asking so by the way, if we were to use a such and such type AI tool, is that going to be an issue? You guys got a policy on that? Is that covered in the contract somewhere? I wouldn't leave it up to chance because
here's something interesting. The regulations vary from country to country. So how's that going to work with the regulations around AI? Is it going to be different from country to country?
It's going to be I bet you. You're bringing up all the you're all the cans. You're just opening all of them like atomic bombs here. Geez, I think
it's valid, though.
Well, but I think we're going to run into exactly what we've already run into around GDPR and HIPAA and privacy, where you have jurisdictions that are notoriously more stringent than others. And then even within one quote unquote jurisdiction like GDPR in the EU, you have individual states that can pull it down and apply it in far and vastly different ways. I mean, the funny part is I'm not sure that regulators understand and or the world realizes, but having such inconsistencies and lack of harmonization, you just created a whole other arm of the industry. Now you have whole companies who all they're doing is basically cataloging all of those regulations so that as you move and work in different places, you don't have to go do all the homework and you would know what to do. It's another application of AI, honestly. Right? Full circle. But it is. But here's the other side of it. I mean, we talk about harmonization, it's easy to even get, our own federal or state governments in the United States to agree on basic bills and principles, okay? The idea that you're going to go across multiple countries, cultures, traditions, experiences, I remember being in, and I won't call out the country name because they'll know what I was doing, but I was in a country in Africa and I was there working on a potentially international IRB. And it was very exciting. It was research that was actually sponsored by the federal government of the United States. And it was very unique. And we got, every I dotted and every T crossed. And we felt really confident that all of the partners, both Africa and US side, were very, well supported, well intentioned. And the very last person that we needed to have their blessing, legally, we didn't require it. There was nothing in paper. There's nothing in writing. Culturally, this was the person that had to bless this. And I was lucky that I had the individuals there in Africa to lead me to that. And when we sat down to talk to this particular person, I could tell from the moment we sat down, this conversation was unfortunately not going to go well. And I couldn't figure out why. I was like, am I coming on too strong? Did I say the wrong thing? Did I miss a cultural step here? And it was a woman to a woman. So I didn't think there was any gender issue. It was just, I could not make light of it. And finally, by the end of the conversation, not only was it not going to proceed, but also this person was very, very adamant and told me about their own experience, that so many high value, visible Western organizations had come in with these great intentions and then taken advantage of the individuals in their culture. And that was why they were staunchly opposed to it, because no matter how well it was set up, no matter how well it was orchestrated, that is always what ended up happening. And so they were painfully aware of that. And so I remember walking out of the meeting and going, okay, but there's no rule that says we even have to have this person's approval. And I don't want to piss off a whole continent, but also, I was charged to come here and make this happen. And I don't have a legal reason it can't happen. And it was yeah, you don't understand. It can't happen now. It just can't. And I say all that long-winded way of saying there's so much more than just politics. There's so much more than just egos. That person in that moment was protecting her culture. Mm-hmm. She was standing up for abuses that came before me and that, while sadly I had nothing to do with, were very real. And she couldn't take another chance. And I respected that once I understood what was going on. It was unfortunate, but I respected it. And, we talked about how could we maybe someday down the road reach a point where that trust could be established. And so, how on earth are you going to get who knows how many jurisdictions there technically are in regulatory, but at least hundreds, if not thousands. How are you ever going to get them all on one standard? And here's the other part of it. That standard probably wouldn't be right for everyone. That is too broad. When I did my master's research on taking research misconduct and integrity rules in Western environments, when you have funding that comes from the US that then goes overseas to a non-Western location. And that's where the research is taking place, in the non-Western location. But because it's being funded from the Western side, you have to accept certain regulatory principles or say, I will enforce certain levels of, integrity, misconduct, noncompliance, et cetera. And I'm not suggesting you don't have to have some regulation, no matter where you're doing your research. But we did deep research on, do these concepts even mean the same thing in the non-Western culture? And are you really actually having compliance and quality because you're forcing a concept that was defined elsewhere and by another culture and with another cultural in mind to then apply in a separate culture? It doesn't mean that anywhere you're doing research, you don't want great quality ethical research, but what compliance or non-compliance means in one space just does not equate in another. And we just assume everybody does. We're just shoving that harmonization principle out there like it exists, and we know it doesn't. I think you're going to have absolutely that. I think you're going to have a host of different regulations. I think it'll be interesting to see who goes first. I want to see the race. You know what I mean? Let's see the race. Who's going to regulate first? Because the reality is there is some tandem to some of the regulatory organizations. If EMA is coming out with something, it's not like FDA is not watching, and vice versa. So I'll be very curious. I think once one drops something, then it's going to be, a domino effect.
Regulations, they're constantly evolving. Do you think AI is going to be able to keep up in real time and sort of maintain that compliance with all the rule changing?
I think it's the other way around. I think AI will move so fast that every time we set up, a regulatory infrastructure, it will be able to hopefully comply within reason. There'll have to be, some tweaks and some steps, but it'll be yeah, that's great, regulatory body that put out guidance 101. You want to finally regulate this technology that was brand spanking new and really flashy 3 years ago. So that's great. Go ahead and comply. But by the way, we're all the way over here. We've iterated 18 steps ahead in those 3 years. So now you're going to have to catch up to what we're doing today. and then we're going to catch up. And then it's like what we were already talking about. Like we're always behind. So I don't think it's a matter of whether or not the AI tools can be compliant. I think it's that we're going to be, by the time we're regulating them, it's going to be antiquated. We're going to be on to the next thing because it's just iterating so fast. And you're seeing
roller skates.
Yeah, it is, right? On ice, like downhill, like straight downhill. Like, which, hey, I'm not saying I wouldn't get on that ride. I just, yeah, that's how I think it is. And unfortunately, while we always see the FDA take that middle road strike, it has some power to it because, you have time to evaluate and come up with a good regulation. I think that you are going to have this one be slightly off timing wise in that you're going to be regulating something that no one's really using anymore. And then you're never going to catch up. It's going so fast. Now, what I do wonder is, there's multiple task forces right now throughout the different regulatory agencies tasked with understanding and knowing the different technology that's coming out. I'm wondering if your larger regulatory agencies they already have task forces for this, whether they're admitting it or not. But I'm wondering if they don't essentially begin getting more aggressive and in some ways begin like shifting how guidance is issued to be able to allow, like you can't change how long it takes to actually set a regulation or get it passed into the code of federal regulations. But maybe that task force could offer faster guidance, right? Because they're, AI specialists, they're regulatory specialists, they're scientists. They know what that particular regulatory agency is really concerned about. Like if you took your subject matter experts inside, EMA, FDA, IRB, or I guess OHARP, not IRB, and said like, I want, these genius minds to sit in a room and think of all of the things that are great about this and also all the ways that we are concerned about this and begin to put something together faster, almost like they're a subsidiary. Kind of like, how like big pharma has like subsidiaries within their pharmaceutical company. So that's where I could see them moving towards using that in a way to like speed up and expedite and get guidance out faster. But other than that, I think timing is everything. And here's the thing. All the folks who are working in this, fast-paced AI, startup, tech, so on space, they know time's not their friend either. Everyone's rushing to have something in the market. So this pace is just extraordinary. And I'm sure, everyone who came before us has always said this about every new invention that, it's just faster than ever. But this pace is extraordinary. And so, however far behind regulatory falls from innovation, we're about to widen that gap if we can't move faster. And I don't think that's a good thing. I don't. I think you've got a saturated, fast-moving space where not all the players know what they're doing. Not all the players may even be well-intentioned, although I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. And we're still talking about patient care here at the end of the day. We're still talking about an industry that, Henrietta lacks. Let's dive into all of the, things that have happened not so distant past. So I think the idea that it's okay to have this lag or to let it widen and that it's the wild, wild west is actually kind of scary. It really is. Now, once you get in and you go to, DAA and you're on the trade show floor and you see what they're all doing, most of it's benign. So it's like, okay, they're not going to like kill a patient today. But also some of it doesn't add value and it's out there, right? It's like the way we collect so much data in trials and you don't even know why we're collecting some of that data. Right. And that's not always a good thing. Like that's more data is not necessarily better. And so I think that's the part that we're going to, in the regulatory industry, we're going to struggle with. Like, and right now, like, how do you even advise your clients? There is no regulation to tell them what to do. The
regulation is no regulation right now.
Right. But that doesn't mean you can tell them like, wild, wild west, have fun.
Right.
So it's really a tough position to be in the regulatory market, but it's also exciting. It's moving fast and it's happening. It's happening. So.
Well, Edye, I've absolutely loved our conversation today. Like, I'm so grateful for you and our friendship and just chatting about AI and like.
Well, and the group that we've put together, and not in a name dropping type of way, but just truly the group of individuals I feel like we have, between you, me, and several others in the industry, the way we're able to work together and support each other and refer to each other and help each other out, and call each other up on questions. That's the most powerful thing in this industry that we could all have. So I am equally as grateful for you because without folks like that, without networks like that, we can't make nearly the impact that we're making.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the TMF Daily Podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.